Hello, Abigail here with the astrology for this week. This week, we really have just one day that's really impacted. So, I kind of want to take this moment to really remind us of where we are in the context of the astrology before I get into the astrology of this week. So, next week, after this week, we end up with Uranus going into Gemini. This is a really big deal. It will be retrograding back briefly into Taurus, but this is the beginning of something really new and fresh. Uranus and Gemini, we're looking at things like the Civil War and World War II, as far as like major times of change and innovation. Unfortunately, throughout the, you know, breadth and length of innovation and history of the world, humans have tended to have created innovation around violence. So there's a lot of change and shifts coming, not just in our personal lives, but in the way we function in the world as a race of human beings. Uh, but we don't have to repeat the same paths and patterns. We don't have to only use war and violence for progress. And I think that's kind of the challenge of this Uranus and Gemini, especially after our Taurus Uranus transit, is to take what we learned in that transit, to take what we've learned about living holistically and what needs to be done in order to change things like climate change and to shift perspectives and dynamics. And also in Taurus, we kind of learned, at least some of us did, not all of us. Some of us have been awake before now, and some of us have yet to be awake. We've learned how interconnected everything is, which is very Taurus kind of idea. This idea that everything is interconnected. One of my favorite representations in tarot of the Hierophant, which is the card of Taurus, is mushrooms and mycelium and how they're all so interconnected. So it is both a call to action to not repeat cycles, to create innovation within compassion and empathy, and also to innovate in our own lives. Whatever house holds Gemini in your chart is going to receive quite the kick in the pants, quite the change. So go and take a peek at that. Go look up Uranus transits. I always encourage people, you don't have to be an astrologer to be interested or to practice astrology. Then also a reminder, at the end of this month, we're heading into another Mercury retrograde. And this Mercury retrograde is very tied to the things that we've been experiencing in the past 2 years. So the Venus retrograde in Leo, the Mercury retrograde in Leo, which is last year. The part of the retrograde with Mars part was in Leo, and now we're getting this kind of final Leo hit with this Mercury retrograde. So this is like a multi-layered Mercury retrograde that's going to be bringing us dynamic and showing us where we've needed to change and shift. And also it's a moment of victory where we get to see Reggie. Sorry, my dog's barking. Hey, no, hey. He doesn't like it when I record. Hey, Reggie, come here. Good boy. Anyways, so, there's a lot going on in that aspect. And, a reminder that, Saturn will be stationing retrograde soon. Neptune will be stationing retrograde. We'll be going back into Pisces, and all of those shifts will not happen again until we head into 2026. So that's just this little pin in the astrology of 2025. Same with, Uranus. We're going to be dealing with that. And something in this week that is really important to the Uranus transit happens on Friday. And Friday, the 4th of July, is pretty much where all of the activity is this week. Obviously, astrology is always playing out, but this week, the kind of events are happening on Friday. So we start off with Venus conjunct Uranus. And this is especially important because it's the last planetary conjunction before Uranus goes into Gemini for the first time. And secondly, it's at 29 degrees, which is the anaretic degree, which is kind of where everything happens all at once, all the time. And so we are going to be experiencing this really bombastic, intense relational moment, a moment where things that need to change are going to come into high relief, where a massive focus on the shifts and the innovation required to have healthy and whole relationships, to have Taurus relationships, to have relationships that encompass and complete the function that they have been given. Doesn't mean that a relationship is supposed to contain everything, but it means that whatever that relationship is meant to meet, to care for, to participate in, is going to be called to do that thing. And if your relationships are not doing that, you will need to be in this moment of very intense discomfort. It's also a great moment of change. I would also like to remind you, if you were born in the early 90s, we have the Uranus Neptune conjunction. And depending on when you were born, especially kind of closer to the middle, you're getting some aspects from those planets to that. So this is also going to be setting off that cluster. Even though I think most of us are kind of in like the early to mid 20s, it is a big enough moment for that cluster to be kicked off. So check the house where your Uranus and Neptune are if you were a early 90s baby. But yeah, and this Venus moment, it requires us to face what we need for the future. It requires us to see how something must change and the consequences if it does not change, and what we will have to do in order to liberate and to free ourselves to get the things that we need when it comes to relationship values and needs and all of these lovely things that are very good and wonderful, but often can kind of fall by the wayside, especially when life gets going. And then we have Venus moving into Gemini right after that, and then Uranus will move into Gemini and they'll be kind of adjacent for a second. And that's kind of that opportunity to call in these new relationships and ideas and ways of functioning within the context of others. And, Gemini is very playful and fun. It'll be a little less serious than Venus and Taurus. Venus and Taurus is domicile, it's really happy there. Venus in Gemini is a bit flighty and funny and silly, and all things that are required to maintain interest in stable relationships. I never think that zodiac signs and placements are opposed. It's just finding how they integrate and how they complement each other. And then last but not least, the first retrograde of those, we already have Pluto retrograde, but the first retrograde of our freshly minted planets happens, and this is Neptune stationing retrograde in Aries. We will see how this plays out as it comes along. But Neptune in Aries is about ideals, and that conjunction with, Saturn, which you'll be heading closer to Saturn as it retrogrades before Saturn stations retrograde, also reveals the ways in which our ideals have failed us, the ways in which we've been propagandized, the ways in which we maybe have, acted on information that was less than clear. So it's a really fun and funky situation, because we get this energy of like idealism and this passionate, fiery, overblown kind of existence and dreams and desires, and Saturn kind of hauls that up short. And so there's a really funky place where a lot of people are in a state of really high delusion and anger wrapped up in that, and kind of the spicier feelings. And then we also have people who are like, Jesus, how long has this been going on? Astrology affects people differently. We are seeing a wave of people waking up and changing. The win for Zoran Mondami was, and I know I butchered that. Dyslexia really kicks my butt, but Zoran's win is a very good representation of what happens when Jupiter squares Neptune and Saturn in Aries, and how that resistance can create change. That's why I'm never a hater on squares, because you don't get anything done unless you have a square. You do not get the resistance you need to change unless you have a square. So yeah, a lot of stuff is happening. Neptune retrograde to me is often kind of a revelation of stuff. It's a moment to get some more clarity. To me, Neptune retrograde always feels, and this is as someone with a retrograded Neptune, so someone without one is going to feel differently. It always feels like a veil being pulled back, or like Atlantis coming up from the depths to the surface of the water. Very deep states and subconscious things coming to the surface and having to be faced and negotiated and navigated. So this moment definitely feels like a buildup in this week, especially since, then on the other side, we go straight into our, Uranus into Gemini. But it is definitely a moment of disillusionment. I think Venus going into Gemini will soften that a little bit. We'll get to laugh a little bit about about the problems we have found and about the things we have had to face and reckon with on the other side. But really dig into what you need. Dig into the change that you desire. And it can be scary because we don't know if the people that we love are willing to change with us. It's just, even if they are someone who seems to be progressive and changing and things, sometimes there are just things they're not ready for. And so it can be scary to sit in a Venus Uranus moment, hoping that the people that you care about are ready to join you on this journey. And it's about trust. And I will just say, you should not clip your own wings because someone else is not ready to fly. And if they are meant to fly with you, they will catch up. But that is my message for this week. I hope you all enjoy kind of the release from having a bunch of major stuff happen, at least in the first part of the week. I know last week was literally every single day had something happening. But yes, this is the reading for this week. If you enjoy my stuff, please like and subscribe. Makes me feel good about what I do. And I'm an Aries Venus, liking and, and encouraging me makes me feel good about myself. And, always you can ask me questions. You can connect with me on other platforms. Do what you will. But I will see you all in a different time and space. Have a lovely week.